The Secrets of Star Trek is brought to you by the Star Quest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek episode 143.
Captain to bridge.
Spock here.
Make it so. Surrender is not an option.
Attention crew of the Enterprise, this is James Kirk.
We are all explorers, driven to know what's over the horizon, what's beyond our own shores.
We would have helped you get home if you had asked. That's who Starfleet is.
Hi, I'm Dom Bettinelli, and you're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, where we discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings found in all the Star Trek TV series, movies, and more. And today we're discussing the Voyager episode, The Scorpion. And joining me today on the panel are Father Cory Stika. Hi, Father Cory.
How's it going?
Very well, thanks. And Jimmy Aiken. Hi, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
Please, we ask you if you could share this podcast with your Trekkie friends. Let them know about it. We want to keep growing this community of listeners. It's growing well, and every time as it grows, it gets better because we get this awesome feedback and relationship with you, the listener. So we love to see the increased number of downloads, which means there's more and more of you listening, and welcome. That I want to say that as well. So we're talking about Scorpion. As I've mentioned before in the last few episodes, we're mixing things up a little bit. We're still going through each series one by one, in a round robin fashion. Last time we talked about Deep Space Nine. Now we're talking Voyager. But we're going to go back and forth between first season and middle of the TV series run about for most of the series. Some of them we're not going to do that, but partly because so many first seasons were not as great, and we realized we're going to spend a lot of time talking about episodes that aren't as great. So we want to kind of mix it up a bit.
And we know that our episode rants are pretty entertaining, but they're really not entertaining for us because we have to watch these episodes.
Right. So for this one, we've jumped ahead to the end of season 3, the season finale. And the reason for that is because it's kind of a two-parter with the season 4 first episode. Although
basically we're getting this is the setup for Kess's departure and Seven of Nine's arrival.
Yep.
Right. This is the big, if you look at Voyager, where's the big switcheroo and things? This is where
turning
it happens.
point.
Yeah. So this is we'll have this one, and then next time we'll talk about the season 4 episode 1. This episode is, just to give you a quick recap, Voyager's now on the edge of Borg space, which encompasses thousands of star systems apparently, and they encounter species 8472, which is apparently more powerful than the Borg and is bent on destroying all life in the galaxy. A la the Daleks of Doctor Who, which means that Janeway has to enter into an alliance with the Borg eventually in order to defeat 8472 and get through safely. So that's the recap.
So before we get into it, I had a couple of thoughts. One of them was sort of on a macro level, and one of them was much smaller. So on the macro level, as I was thinking about Voyager as a series, they really should have lifted more from the Odyssey, because that's what they're doing. This is essentially an outer space retelling of the Odyssey. Right. And I think they should have looked to the Odyssey for more inspiration for stories and ongoing plot lines and things like that. I think it would have improved the series, because especially in their first few seasons, they were pretty much flailing about. In all of the 1980s, 90s Star Trek franchises, the first few seasons are nowhere near as good as where they end up. And a lot of that is because of lack of planning.
Right.
And lack of an overall coherent story. And so if they had said, okay, well, look, we're doing the Odyssey, that could have helped drive the series forward from the beginning in a way it didn't, because what they were thinking more seems to have been, we're doing Lost in Space, which was an episodic TV series with no continuing story from one episode to the next, and also was for children. So that was my macro thought. Should have taken more inspiration from the Odyssey. My micro thought is Janeway's briefing room table really looks like something you'd find in a casino. It's got this long central zone that terminates in a circle. I mean, you just want to throw dice down that.
I agree. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I think it's supposed to be stylized off Voyager, but it doesn't quite work. It's interesting, though, you mentioned kind of, having the longer story arc, like all of the Odyssey. And, of course, this is about the time that Babylon 5 is finishing up to the point of it's finished. This idea of telling the long-form story in a series is starting to become more popular when Voyager is airing.
And DS9 has just finished doing that as well.
Yeah, and so it's interesting that those thoughts are out there, but they really didn't come in time for the start of Voyager. And I think you could argue there is some evidence that they were trying to do that towards the end. But, of course, it was too little too late at that point, and they really couldn't do much with what they had already put in place. And it is interesting to kind of that this is kind of that transition between the more episodic formula and then, of course, Battlestar Galactica is shortly after Voyager ends or around the time Voyager ends and things like that, where there was much more movement in TV towards the longer story arcs, the series long story arcs, the season long story arcs, and so on.
But even then, even if they hadn't wanted to go full, soap opera, and I understand that they didn't at this period in TV history, because a lot of the audience was not yet used to truly long form stories.
Right.
There were balances they could strike, and they could at least say, hey, Odysseus encountered all these islands, where these things were going on. We should mine those for plots. Yeah. Even if we're not going to have an overall connected story, we could at least base our episodes on some interesting episodes from the Odyssey.
Yeah, a little Scylla and Charybdis, a little Cyclops,
That's assuming that the producers were actually knowledgeable in things like the Odyssey, which that might be a stretch, but
it would be like, for example, one of the reasons Odysseus took so long to get back to Ithaca was that he killed the Cyclops. And because in self-defense, because the Cyclops was going to eat him and his men, so they killed the Cyclops. Well, it turns out the Cyclops is the son of the god Neptune. So now they've got Neptune honked off at him, and Neptune is going to do his best to keep them from getting back to Ithaca. They've accidentally killed, Janeway has accidentally killed the caretaker's son, and now the rogue mother caretaker is trying to stop them or something.
That would be interesting to have an overarching villain of this sort who impedes their progress. It's not necessarily an existential threat, but is an impediment to their progress. That would be interesting.
I think they tried to do that at the Kazon, and they realized this ain't working.
No,
they got rid of them real quick.
The Kazon were
fun.
Were the Ferengi of Voyager.
I honestly think that they had initially thought that these were going to be the Delta Quadrant villains until they got to the Borg. And it just didn't work, and they were like, "Nope, we're done with them."
Well, speaking
it's interesting that the Kazon are like meant to, visibly be like Klingons.
Yeah.
Only they've got just ridiculous hair.
Bad hair days.
And the Ferengi were also meant to be the replacement for the Klingons. So we have with both Next Gen and Voyager, we have attempts to capture the Klingon magic again that spectacularly fail.
Yep.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes. You'd say with DS9, the Cardassians, they kind of succeeded. I think the Cardassians did turn out to be a good villain race. So I'd say that with them.
Well, no. For some of DS9, the Klingons ended up being a good Klingon. So
well, yes, I know, as we just talked about. So you mentioned the Borg. It's interesting. This is the beginning of them bringing the Borg into the show in a big way, where they weren't.
Right.
They'd encountered them before, but not now. They will be a regular part of it, especially since 709 is now going to become a crew member coming up. And part of that was because of the success of Star Trek First Contact, the movie that had come out. And they're like, you know what? We really ought to be bringing the Borg in. The audience likes them, and that'll be a way to kind of revive the show. And so that was part of that.
Including
Kinda
grabbing
like
the Queen from
Yeah.
First Contact.
Yeah.
Yep.
Kind of like also they brought the Klingons into Deep Space Nine to give it a ratings boost.
Exactly. We just talked about that. On the other hand, this is when they decided to get rid of Cass in favor of 7 of 9. So this is Jennifer Leans, I think that's how you pronounce her name.
Yeah.
It's her last episode as a regular cast member. She'll come back later as angry Cass. We'll encounter, but
she'll also be back at the beginning of the next season, just
Right.
to say goodbye, in essence. But yeah,
right, these 2 episodes, yeah.
They're speaking of the Borg. Now, I have 2 Voyager plots that I came up with. At least one of them I came up with while Voyager was on the air, and I actually thought about pitching it because they were open for outside pitches on Star Trek, unlike a lot of things. And it's actually a good story, and someone I told it to remembered it in detail from back when I told it to him in the 1990s, and recently sent me all the details, and it's like, oh yeah, I'd forgotten about that part. Sometime I'll have to tell you the story of tomorrow's Enterprise.
Okay.
And the Borg are involved in that. But I also had a memory of a Voyager episode that appears not to exist. And so I came up somehow with a second Voyager plot, unless I've just missed it, because I've been looking for this, and I have not found it. Well, it could be the Mandela effect. But the premise was you have a group of ex-Borg, and I know we do have an ex-Borg episode, but what happens in this one is you've got a group of ex-Borg who have been freed. One of them has become obsessed with like 7 of 9 because she assimilated him or something. And he wants her to, now that he's liberated also, he wants her to experience the terror that he had to go through upon being assimilated. And so he's willing to pay any price for that. He's even willing to be reassimilated himself as long as he can get her reassimilated as a conscious adult and not just as a little kid who doesn't understand what's going on. And he engineers a situation where he's got him and 7 of 9 and the Borg are coming to assimilate them. And at the last minute, 7 of 9 gets beamed out and he's left to be assimilated by himself.
Ooh.
And I think there's some powerful psychology in there that you could develop an interesting obsession plotline with.
Yeah.
And I thought it was a real episode, but apparently it's not.
Yeah,
I don't know if I dreamed that plotline or what.
It vaguely reminds me of the story behind what were the Borg kids that they get later.
Yeah, Icheb and all that.
Icheb, and how Icheb was a sacrifice to the Borg, and so it's kind of a little bit like that. Yeah, and then the people who sacrificed him to the Borg eventually ended themselves suffering the karmic retribution in a sense for it. So it's a little bit like that. No, but that's it. Yeah,
and we have karmic retribution going on here, but in a somewhat different context.
Yes, I like it. That would be maybe even a good novel.
Yeah.
So, all right. So let's talk about this one. The title of the episode is Scorpion, and part of it, the title might be just because the 847 species 8472 look vaguely scorpion insect-like, although more praying mantis than anything.
Well, and it's also the whole parable of the scorpion and the fox.
Yeah.
I think the 8472 looks goofier than anything. It biologically very implausible.
So the parable is originally the scorpion and the frog, although inexplicably they change it. Chakotay tells the scorpion and the fox. I don't understand why. Like, what aesthetic or other reason you would change it?
Well, it's like in the Good Samaritan episode where they have to refer to the story of the Good Samaritan. Just call it the parable. You call this a parable. Everybody knows it as the parable of the Good Samaritan. Nobody knows it as the story of the Good Samaritan. Call it the parable of the Good Samaritan. Why the stupid change?
And this is the parable of the scorpion and the frog. Why change it to a fox?
Maybe there weren't frogs on the Native American planet. I don't know.
But there were foxes and scorpions. So anyway, we started with the episode with.
Okay, now for people who may not be familiar,
the
story goes: a scorpion wants to cross a river and finds a frog who can take him across the river. Says, "Please take me across the river." The frog says, no, you'll sting me if I do that, and we'll both drown. But he convinces him, well, no, I won't, because then we'd both drown. So the frog agrees to take him across. In the middle of the river, the scorpion stings him anyway. Why? Because I'm a scorpion. It's my nature.
Yep.
So
Yes.
the parable applied to us is you can't trust the Borg.
Right.
Because
It's
they're
their
going to
nature.
do what their nature tells them to do.
Right. So the episode starts with basically one of the shortest teasers in Star Trek Voyager, where you see these two cubes. They're approaching some target that we don't see. It's from that target's point of view. You will be assimilated, and the target essentially, although not audibly, says no, we won't, and just shoots the cubes and they explode. And so we get the sense of there's something that's strong enough to single shot kill two cubes. Okay.
And this is the first time we've ever had more than one cube on the screen at a time.
Not even at Wolf 359? Was that one cube?
That was just one cube.
One cube.
That took it all of Starfleet? Wow.
Yep.
All right. So then we have Janeway on the holodeck with Leonardo da Vinci, played by John Rhys Davies, who
Gimli. Gimli is Leonardo.
Gimli, and also Sala from Voyager's Lost Ark. And he was apparently a Star Trek fan, and he was offered the part without an audition, of course, and he leapt at it. And it was apparently Kate Mulgrew's idea to have a holographic Leonardo da Vinci to be a confidant for Janeway. I think that's interesting. He'll show up again in at least one more episode.
Oh, several more episodes. I wish he would show up even more than that. I would have loved to have him as a regular.
Yes, that would have been cool. Yeah, I like the interaction. And one of the things that I read about when I was looking at this episode is that both Kate Mulgrew and the writers both agreed that the end of the third season was when Janeway finally became the captain they had wanted her to be. She's a little more freewheeling, a little more risk-taking, and she's a lot more in personality like Kate Mulgrew. So Mulgrew kind of had grown into the part in the sense.
Also, Mulgrew is a practicing Catholic, and you can see how she enjoys the scenes with Leonardo because he's an Italian Catholic in Italy, and they don't have to be antiseptic Starfleet dancing around religion, ignoring it and pretending it doesn't exist. She gets to talk to Leonardo about cardinals and monasteries and abbots and praying in chapels and all kinds of stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Very nice. If you ever want to see Kate Mulgrew, she played St. Elizabeth Ann Seton in a movie, which was very nice, which they play at the Shrine. You can actually see parts of it in their presentation at the Shrine. So it's kind of cool. So I do want to mention about Species 8472. You mentioned, Jimmy, I have a note here. Don't want to forget to talk about it. Their design. It was to be seen in glimpses and shadows and not very often, partly to keep the suspense, but also because the CGI was not great. So
no.
I did have a note for that.
Well, speaking of transition period, this is where they're transitioning from models to more computer CGI, and you can tell.
Right.
Yeah. And I can forgive special effects that, have technological limitations. I mean, I watched classic Doctor Who, so of course I can forgive that kind of thing. But I don't like the design for Species 8472. They're meant to have 3 legs. And they don't really pull it off because if you want to do 3 legs, you need to have radial body symmetry. And they don't. They have bilateral body symmetry, and 3 legs looks ridiculous.
Yeah.
If you have bilateral body symmetry but 3 legs. Also, their heads look menacing now, or are meant to look menacing. Now, apparently, Ron Moore steered them away from having big teeth, which was sort of the original plan. Because big teeth says this thing's a physical threat, but does not communicate this is an intellectual threat. And so they went the other way of these things have almost no mouth and much bigger eyes and a much bigger brain case. And, okay, that's fine if you want to signalize this thing is smart. But the problem is you don't want it to make its head look like it's partially melted marzipan that's banana flavored and yellow colored.
Yeah, that's true. So let's talk about the holo program. So now that I remember to get those things out of the way. So Janeway is there in uniform, not costume, which I think is an interesting cue that she's not playing in a holo novel. She's doing something a little different with Leonardo, and she's asking to work in his workshop with him, and he's kind of putting her off. No, I work alone. And she needs to convince him that she would be an asset to his work. He also demonstrates a robotic clockwork arm, which I think is fun. The arm of Hephaestus. which is really neat, and kind of looks forward to the day in which manufacturing robots would be possible, like in the 20th century.
And the irony is that Hephaestus really did, in Greek mythology, did make robots.
Right.
That's what Pandora is. She's a robotic woman that Hephaestus made.
That's right. So there's some nice interaction, as you mentioned, Jimmy, and there's some good dialogue. But she's called away to the bridge, and one of their long-range probes has been intercepted by the Borg because they're entering Borg space. And so they notice, so they know that the Borg know that they're there somewhere and they're coming, and that concerns them. So they have determined that there's this area of Borg space that they're calling the Northwest Passage that's devoid of any Borg activity. And so they're going to try to fly through that.
And it's devoid of Borg activity because there's a bunch of gravitic and spatial anomalies there, so the Borg are giving it a wide berth.
Right.
Which is completely implausible. They would figure something out.
Yeah. And it's also, it's just sort of, it's the 2D mental thinking about space that Star Trek in this era especially is prone to.
Let's go above the galactic plane for a few years.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah. So they have I like the briefing. They kind of go through like, okay, weapons, sensors, medical, medical defense, logistics and supply, it kind of goes through everybody. How are we going to, spend this time in Borg space, which I'm not sure how long they think it's going to take. This is essentially the rest of the series. So 4 more seasons, I guess, that's the idea. Because at the end of the 7th season, they use a transwarp conduit to get home, but they're still in Borg space.
Yeah.
So, which is interesting.
It's the Borg transwarp conduit.
Right. Yep. So it's interesting to consider that how much of the Delta Quadrant is Borg.
Which does make sense because, of course, the Borg have been around for a very long time and have been assimilating species for a very long time. So it makes sense they've spread out to that level.
Yeah.
The real answer is the writers didn't know how long they were going to be in Borg space.
That's right. Yeah. So meanwhile, Cass is with the Doctor, and she has this telepathic vision of this really creepy...
But before that, we have her and the Doctor talking about how Borg assimilation works now that we've decided how it works. And it involves, you get stuck with these tubules which can go through any force field or substance known.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right. And how about 2 inches of steel plating? Will they go through that?
Easily.
4 inches?
Yes.
And I'm pretty sure we could come up with something these things can't go through. But they inject you with nanoprobes, as he calls them, and then the first thing they take over is your red blood cells.
Mm-hmm.
That all they do is deliver oxygen and nutrients to your other cells. Yeah. They're not command and control.
Yeah.
Why would you take those things over? Who cares what the red blood cells are doing? I mean, maybe after you've taken over the brain, you want to replace the red blood cells with another technological nutrifying system.
Maybe the blood cells provide fuel for the new probes that it's going to manufacture.
My headcanon was my headcanon was blood cells go through the body, every minute or whatever it is, so it gets the probes to where they need to go. But that's total headcanon. It's just, it sounds good by me, have the picture of the red blood cells turning gray.
Yeah, well, once you're into the blood vessels, you can pilot your nanoprobe self wherever you want. You don't need to piggyback on a blood cell.
Yeah.
So this is kind of dumb. But then, Kes gets a vision from H.R. Geiger of a bunch of disassembled Borg.
Yes, piled up in a big, gross pile. And also, she senses the destruction of Voyager. So it's in a premonition.
Which we're only told. So, okay.
Yep.
If you're wanting to show us the imminent, you're giving us the Cassandra warning here. We're going to have something that kills Borg. Oh, and we're going to get destroyed too. We want to see us getting destroyed too. That's kind of more important than the pile of dead Borg.
Yeah.
And we don't see her vision of that. We're just told she had one after the fact.
It was too expensive to blow up the model.
They
or
managed.
something.
They managed to do it on Babylon 5 in the first season.
Yes. So then this red alert because a armada of 15 Borg cubes. Now that's not just 2 anymore. Now there's 15 on screen at once that come flying by Voyager and pretty much ignore it, except for one stops to scan and then goes, which is kind of creepy. Where are they going?
They are able to knock it away like a fly. It just kind of bumps Voyager out of the way. But other than that,
in the turbulence, Voyager would have pretty handily been assimilated if they had decided to stop. Yeah. We have a surprisingly tender moment between Chakotay and Janeway in her ready room as she ponders whether we should retreat.
Not in the romantic sense.
No. In a friend sense, yes.
Yeah. And so they've got to decide. She says, we've all known this day was coming, that we're going to hit Borg space, and we're going to have to decide, do we go through it and risk assimilation, or do we try to find a nice planet in the Delta Quadrant and live out the rest of our lives here?
Yeah.
And she's talking it over with Chakotay, and it's a really nice kind of complex friendship scene.
Mm-hmm.
And I like this a lot. I like the acting from Kate Mulgrew.
Mm-hmm.
Even Robert Beltran was motivated to actually care about his acting in this episode. He later checked out totally on the series. He felt like, funny. Well, they're not giving me anything good to work with, so why should I do more than phone it in?
Right.
Wow. But here he's actually still caring about the scene, and so that's nice. I find it a little implausible in that he's like, well, I'll support whatever you do. Why don't you think about it, and we'll announce it to the crew in the morning. And it's like, okay, this is a major decision. Mm-hmm. I think it needs a little more exploration than one person thinking about it overnight.
Right.
I think we need to, at a minimum, poll the senior officers and get their input on the pros and cons of all this.
Yes.
Yeah, just sleep on it.
Sleep on it.
That's literally what he says. Just sleep on it.
Right. So, in the meantime, those 15 Borg cubes have suddenly stopped a few light years away. So they go to investigate, and they're all been destroyed. So now we have this someone more powerful than the Borg. And I think it was Kim who's all excited, like, "Hey, look, a new ally who can help us." And Janeway's like, or maybe if they're more powerful than the Borg, they may not be friendly to us.
Yeah. Sorry, Harry. This is the point where I reveal that once again you are a young, wet behind the ears ensign, and it's my turn to shoot you down.
Yep. After 3 years as a young, wet behind the ears ensign.
Yes. Poor Harry. So they find out that there's this ship or something, organic technology attached to the remains of one of these cubes where there's an atmosphere inexplicably inside still. So Chakotay, Harry, and Tuvok beam over to the damaged Borg ship. They want to get a closer look at the aliens who are on board there, and they find the pile of Borg body parts.
Specifically, they want to get a close-up scan of the bioship.
Right.
That's attached to the Borg because their scanners aren't working on it for convenience reasons.
Right.
But yeah, they find the pile of dead Borg that H.R. Geiger painted for them, and Harry said, "Didn't Kes say we were all going to die?" And I'm like, I don't know, maybe Tuvok said she did, but I didn't see it.
Yeah.
So this pile of body parts, I mean, is this evidence of like 8472 is not just merely clinically destroying things, but this is emotion, this is hate, anger of some sort.
Well, they keep talking about hate and the strong will survive and things like that. That Kes keeps having these feelings of hatred and evil and stuff like that. So
that's kind of why I call them like the Daleks of Star Trek in that sense. Because the Borg weren't about hate. What made them scary. They were just implacably emotionless. They're the Cybermen of Star Trek in that sense. Whereas the 8472 really feels more malevolent.
They're intensely xenophobic, and they're the only thing they know of in their pocket universe that's intelligent.
Right. And so finding other intelligences makes them angry. So they go aboard. Okay.
Talking about this bioship.
Yes, I was going to mention that.
I've seen better bioships. On Doctor Who, we had the awesome low-budget 70s Zygon bioship in Doctor Who and the Loch Ness Monsters. Also, back in the early 70s, we had the Claws of Axis bioship from the Third Doctor's time. And both of those had much more interesting bio designs to the technology than what we've got here, which is basically flat walls with some what look like maybe blood vessels painted on them.
Right. Yeah, they didn't do a very. I can't imagine if they ever convert this to 4K how bad that set will look. Yeah, there was a lot more they could have done with it, and it was kind of they didn't spend a lot of time. But they go aboard and they're attacked by the alien. Eventually, it comes back, and Harry gets injured, and then the alien shoots at Voyager, but somehow Voyager doesn't get a scratch on it, but from this weapon that can destroy Borg cubes with a single shot.
It was only a glancing blow, I guess.
I guess.
And Janeway orders Paris to get them out of there at maximum warp.
Yes. Yeah, so they get away.
Also, I like how when they're trying to beam him back and they're having problems because, again, reasons, B'Elanna says she's going to get a skeletal lock on them. And Janeway says, a what? And B'Elanna says, oh, I just made it up. I'm going to try to lock onto the trace minerals in their bone tissue. Yeah. And I'm going, and I hope you're going to broaden the field once you've done that, because otherwise you're going to get back a bunch of trace minerals.
Yeah, exactly.
Or just their skeletons and nothing else.
Yeah.
Oops.
They don't need those anymore, right?
Yeah. Oh, there's a nice gross pile sitting on that Borg cube.
But once they get them all back and they take Harry to sickbay, and his face is being taken over by some really menacing looking lo mein. And the doctor reveals that this is an infection of the we don't yet know what they're called, but species 8472 cells. They're not transforming Harry, and he's conscious, by the way. He cannot be sedated.
Yep.
They're actually eating him from the inside out. So this is actually a case, instead of a man eating lo mein, this is lo mein eating a man while he's conscious and can't be sedated. And the doctor says that he shows us animations of the cells of species 8472, and they look bigger than human red blood cells. And he tells us they have 100 times more DNA than humans do. It's the most densely coded thing he's ever seen. And I'm going, wow, apparently the amoeba species, Amoeba dubius, is extinct by the 24th century, because we've got it here on Earth, and it has 231 times the DNA of a human being. It's more than twice as densely coded as species 8472.
Calling Andre Bormanis, where was your scientific consultancy on this episode? Andre Bormanis was the science consultant on Star Trek for a long time. The doctor is using modified Borg nanoprobes to fight the infection. He's modified them, which apparently the Borg hasn't figured out how to do. And he says it'll take days to make enough.
And they try to explain that by saying the way the Borg think, they don't really invent, they assimilate. And they haven't been able to assimilate this, so they don't know how to adapt their own stuff. But because we think in a different way than the Borg, we figure out solutions rather than just assimilate ideas we need.
Right.
That we could come up with this. And that's, I don't really buy that, but it's a good attempt.
Sure. By the way, Garrett
enough.
Wang, who plays Harry Kim, his reaction to this episode was, oh, great, another episode where Harry gets to lay on a bio bed for half the episode.
Yeah.
which is essentially, I don't know if this is a commentary on Garrett Wang's acting from the producers or not, but he seems to do this a lot in the series.
Hey, I'm blanking on the name of the guy who played Michael Garibaldi.
Doyle.
Jerry Doyle, yeah.
Jerry Doyle. Yeah.
Jerry Doyle was once asked what his favorite episode of Babylon 5 was, and he said, the one where I was unconscious and got full pay for laying on a sickbed and not having to do any action.
You get paid either way, Harry. So Kes reveals that she's been in telepathic connection of some sort with these aliens, the 8472 aliens, for some time. She just hadn't realized it was them, and it was trying to communicate with her. And it was saying the weak will perish. So that's their malevolence there.
So he's species 8472 has been leaving threatening messages on her headphone.
Right. He's stalking her. So, and then they come to find out that the reason the Northwest Passage that they've so-called is clear of Borg activity is because this giant region of space is apparently chock full of, billions of 8472 ships coming through a singularity from another dimension?
Well,
Northwest is passage forbidden.
Yeah.
Northwest is passage forbidden.
And so Janeway has a decision to make now that they can't use this Northwest Passage to get to where they want to go. She can't sleep, so she goes to, because Chakotay told her to sleep on it, remember? But she can't sleep, so she goes to talk to Leonardo on the holodeck. Leonardo suggests Janeway turn to prayer to God for her answer, but that gives her the idea instead maybe what she needs to do is to make a deal with the devil, which I think prayer would not be a bad idea.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, that would have taken him up on the prayer thing.
Yeah, that'd probably be better.
But we've got these secular Hollywood writers, so
right. We kind of want to gently mock Leonardo's faith of that medieval idea. So what she's come up with is she wants to trade the Doctor's discovery on how to defeat 8472 to the Borg in exchange for safe passage. And then you say, oh, well, why don't they just assimilate Voyager to get the information? Nope. Only the Doctor has the information in his matrix and not in the computer, because that's how things work, apparently.
No, they tell him to transfer it all into his holo emitter. So it will be off the computer. And they imply there's a process here that Kes has to help him with to get it out of the computer and into the holo emitter.
Right. Well, because a program can only exist in one place. I mean, that's just one of the things they've done with it. But yes, at this point, he has a holo emitter. And so if the Borg try to assimilate, the holo emitter is to be destroyed immediately.
And this is actually a pretty well thought out plan.
Yes.
And there are some additional aspects to it as well. It also makes sense, and I don't think they explore this as much as they should, but they need to stop species 8472 as well. Because if it's stronger than the Borg and it hates all life in our galaxy, I mean, like Control and Discovery, then once it kicks the Borg's butts, it's going to come after everybody else. Right. And so we, Voyager has an incentive to help the Borg in this because it indirectly helps the rest of us.
Right, the enemy of my enemy is my friend in this sense. Yes,
but the only question is, if the Borg are able to assimilate 8472, then you have real problems.
Right. Although that's the thing is they apparently can't. They're so alien that they are unable.
And so,
to. But yes.
So the doctor's modifications are to destroy the alien cells, not assimilate them.
Yes. This is where Chakotay tells the Scorpion parable, and he gets now he whereas before he was all like, "I'm behind you 100%. Whatever you do, Captain." Now he's suddenly, "I think you're wrong. I'm willing to obey your orders, but I think you're letting the ends justify the means." Allowing the evil of assimilation of species 8472 in order to let us get home. Although, right there, he thinks it's assimilation, I guess.
Yeah, he does. And he says it's wrong to help them assimilate 8472. And so it's like, yeah, if it was any other species, we would certainly say it's wrong to help the Borg assimilate them. Chakotay's got a nice point here.
Yeah.
Yes.
On the other hand, they want to wipe out all life in the galaxy. So it is a conundrum.
Yes.
He also tells her bluntly, I think your desire to get this crew home is blinding you to other options, although he doesn't name any. And then Janeway kind of says, well, then I guess I'm alone after all, despite all of your protestations of having my back earlier. And she's being a little unfair because he does say he'll support her decision. He didn't promise her he was going to agree with everything she decides, just that he'll support it.
Right. Yeah, she gets kind of misty-eyed as she says, "I guess I'm all alone after all." Well,
still, the Chakotay Janeway scenes are the best ones in this.
Yes. I mean, it kind of reveals the whole the captain's chair is the loneliest place on the ship. That sort of thing. That was the captain has to make decisions that sometimes nobody else wants her to make, but that's her job.
Right.
So they go to a Borg planet, which I think is a little fascinating. It's a little bit like Cybertron-ish. Thinking about that there are whole planets full of Borg, and they want to negotiate with the Borg. And Janeway is beamed over to the cube. That wasn't part of the plan, but apparently that's what she's got to do. they said filming that was interesting because what we see is her in this big open space surround, where this Borg
That
far
looks
away.
fake. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas when she's filming it, she's in this. Apparently, she was in this small space. It's a green screen room.
Yep.
And so, in order to kind of get motivation, she's like, "The way I thought about it was, what would it be like to be in a room with dark, surrounded by serial killers?" So that's how she, kind of got the motivation for that scene, which I think was pretty good. So the species 8472 then, in the middle of all this, shows up and then Death Stars the planet, and the cube takes off with Janeway aboard and Voyager in tow, and that's where we end the episode.
And we have lots of fireworks to end on.
Yes.
See, now the Empire should have used that model for the Death Star instead of the big giant artificial moon. Just like a bunch of, get a bunch of Star Destroyers together and blast a central hub.
Yeah, there you go. So that was the season finale, which would have been an interesting way to end the season. And as I recall, it was an interesting way to end the season and wait. I've got to wait till the fall to find out what happens, or whatever it was.
Well, at least this time it wasn't a whole year like it is now.
I know, or longer. So that's how it ends. Any thoughts about the ending or the episode? Last notes on that, Father Cory?
Well, as you mentioned, it was kind of a setup for season 4, and it works well as far as that's concerned. It's definitely not my favorite Voyager episode, but it's not a bad episode. Although you guys kept saying it wrong. It wasn't a bioship. It was some sort of ship, some kind of ship. There were some sort of bio readings. There was some kind of parallel universe. You got to say it right.
I even noticed there was a trailing usage of that. It was an X of some kind at one point.
Yeah, it was the ship of some kind. I think was the one that they did it that way.
Now, you know what? Because of our discussions here on this show, every time any TV show ever uses some kind of, I'm like, oh, I'm noticing it.
Yeah.
In fact, I find myself making sure I don't say, I used some kind of knife to do that. No, I mean, I used a knife to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then,
That's known as the Baader-Meinhof effect, by the way, where after you become conscious of something, you start seeing it all over the place.
Yeah, you buy a car of a certain kind, and all of a sudden everybody has that same exact car. That's
red cars.
And then when the way team goes on the what's left of the cube, there's that Borg that's flying around. It almost looked like it was animatronic. I would be surprised if that was actually a human being doing that, because that was flailing around pretty good.
Oh, okay. Oh, flailing. Yeah.
Flailing,
That was. Yeah, that was true. That's true. Jimmy?
I thought it was much more enjoyable than many Voyager episodes I've seen, but the Chakotay and Janeway scenes were the best.
Yes, although I got to put the Leonardo up there too. Yeah. That's true. I agree. All right, so let's take a moment before we finish up to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create the Secrets of Star Trek, including Susan D., Dominic S., Callistus M., Kiana C., and Andreas S. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Star Trek and all the shows at StarQuest. Now is a great time to become a StarQuest patron thanks to a generous gift from a StarQuest supporter when you start a new Patreon monthly pledge at sqpn.com/give. The first 3 months will be matched by an equal amount from our donor to support all our shows, including this one, making your gift go even further. If you've been thinking of becoming a StarQuest patron, now's the time. Visit sqpn.com/give today. So that's it from us. What did you think of this episode of Star Trek Voyager, The Scorpion? You can let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com/trek or our Facebook page at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia, or send an email to trek@sqpn.com. We'll be back next time when we'll be discussing the Enterprise episode, Dear Doctor, which is not as bad as Night in Sickbay, but until then, Father Cory Stiga, thank you for joining me and sharing the secrets of Star Trek.
Thank you, Dom.
Jimmy Aiken, thank you as well.
I always try to use greetings that are used by the species on the show, and it varies by the species we've just encountered. So thank you, Dom. Live long and prosper. The weak will perish, and resistance is futile. You will be assimilated.
Apparently so. And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Star Trek on StarQuest. And remember, In their collective state, the Borg are utterly without mercy, driven by one will alone, the will to conquer. They are beyond redemption, beyond reason.